Well, so we didn't talk last week, but you've still been pumping out articles. And the ones that I'm really appreciative of are the plain talk about the bankruptcy and the fact that, hey, this is just business. You know, you're going through a bankruptcy, you got to go through the accounts, you got to go through the books, you got to figure out what, you're going to keep and what you're just going to, get rid of. And you've called for the administration to tell the truth.
Right. Stop trying to make, political points. Because, that's what's going on. They're setting up Donald Trump to look like a savior and, the knight on the white horse and all this crap. And he's actually just functioning as a chief executive officer in receipt of uh, a bankrupt organization has to do. He has to go through and do an audit of all the departments and agencies of that decrepit, defunct United States corporation. So it's nothing that we're seeing is anything unusual, except for the size and scale of the bankruptcy.
Right.
The size of the thing is immense. It's just completely overblown. But other than that, it's a typical bankruptcy. They're going through a process of, and it's a Chapter 7 involuntary bankruptcy, which Pope Francis did. I mean, he bankrupted the entire thing, and that was back in 2015. So we're talking about something that is 10 years in progress. This is no new news, or shouldn't be any new news to anybody on the planet if they've been listening to us. So yeah, this is a process, a bankruptcy process, and it's entirely normal, except for the size and scale of the bankrupt entity. Okay, so it's a giant entity that's bankrupt, and that causes, a that causes some complications in terms of how you can do an audit on it, and it takes some time. I mean, this is not going to happen overnight. People who have been paying attention have noticed that the whole USAID boondoggle accounted for less than 1% of the total budget. So you can kind of multiply that out for yourselves, and you can see why Elon Musk's tracking dog programs are necessary to get this done in any reasonable amount of time with any degree of accuracy. So, what they have are tracking programs. They're called tracking programs. And what they do is they go through these systems, both the departmental systems, which the Treasury controls, and the agency accounts, which are all through the former municipal entity. And these tracking programs actually kind of route through the entire system, following each transaction as it branches and branches and branches out. So that to the point where there's nothing more to track, where it comes to the end point where all the transactions end. Okay. These tracking programs are necessary because if you had to sit and do this by hand, this one bankruptcy would take 1,000 years to resolve, right? We couldn't possibly do it without the assistance of the computerized systems and the computerized tracking programs. This is perhaps something that we should take into our consideration going forward, that we should never have a bureaucracy this huge, vast, and complex again, ever. We should make it our business to keep our public business simple and straightforward.
Absolutely. I'll second that.
And the other thing that is coming out about all of this that is something for us to take into consideration for future knowledge is that they are going to be faced with having to reduce the total size and scope of what we have known as the federal government by about 2/3. Between 1/2 and 2/3 of what it has been has to go.
Well, part of that is there were two of everything.
Right, there were two of everything. There was a Department of Labor and a DOL. There was a Department of Transportation and a DOT. These are not just abbreviations, folks. These are separate entities. These are separate corporations that were functioning in tandem and which were both just sort of operating at our expense. We were paying for an entire roster of municipal corporations, all their departments and franchises, and a roster of British territorial departments and corporations. And we were paying for double service on all of this stuff for years, decades. And so what you're seeing now is an auditing of the municipal side, all the alphabet soups that we think of, DOL, DOT, FEMA, BATF, IRS, all that stuff is getting audited. Okay?
Right. Now, and those entities never should have come outside of the boundary stones in DC.
Right. And technically, again, technically that we're looking at legal loopholes here, technically they didn't. Technically, they piggybacked on top of the British territorial entities, which were allowed to have federal enclaves and federal arsenals and ports and federal installations of various kinds. And so the municipal government piggybacked on top of the British territorial government like a flea on a dog. And so wherever the British territorial government had an enclave, the municipal government just came along for the ride and used them as a substrate to operate within our states, which should never have been allowed either. Anyway, the point I was driving toward here was that this bankruptcy is going to result in vast numbers, about 1.5 million guesstimate federal employees will be suddenly unemployed and dumped out into the workforce, and will be adding to the unemployment numbers. Another point, with 2/3, well, 1/2 to 2/3, depending on how much the territorial government absorbs of the old municipal structure. With that amount of programming and institutional, what would you call it? It's not exactly fat, but with that much weight cut out of the federal government, you're going to see a vast decrease in deficit spending. They're not going to be out there paying all these people. Those people are not going to have all the income stream. They're not going to be contributing to the economy, so you're losing more than 1.5 million workers. You're losing 1.5 million worker paychecks, right? And then start adding up some of the other factoids that are flying at you. 25 million people on Medicare and Social Security who were over 100 years old.
Oh, I hadn't heard that statistic.
Yeah, isn't that just fabuloso? Over 100 years old and still collecting. Well, when they pull the plug on that one, all that money is no longer going to be flowing into whichever economy, whether it was the Mexican economy or the Ukrainian economy or whatever it was. That money's going to be gone too. It's not going to be added into the economies. So a lot of this stuff, a $2 trillion savings for them is actually $2 trillion being taken out of either our economy or some other country's economy, depending. And that's going to have this giant sucking sound effect. It's going to just go, all of a sudden, not only the immediate economy generated by all of that, but the future economy generated by all of that is going to vanish pretty much overnight. In the course of a year, maybe 2 years at most, you're going to see this incredible change in the activity that was generated by all of that fraud and all of those people getting all of those checks. Mm-hmm. And, it's all just going to go. Now, what Mr. Trump is hoping to do, and this is, borne out in the tea leaves also that you can watch for yourselves, is to open up a new era of investment. And that investment will then generate jobs. It was sort of ironic, kind of a tongue-in-cheek type thing, to take all these IRS agents that Joe Biden had hired, the 87,000 of them, and send them to the border to, act as extra police and support for ICE and for the Border Patrol. But you're going to see that same kind of sleight of hand where one group of federal employees will be repurposed and will do something else entirely. You'll see situations where the corporation is fronting for new construction. And I think you can look forward to at least 2 large new canal projects. Probably a canal through Nicaragua, and a canal is planned for the west side of the Sinai Peninsula, so that you have the old Suez Canal coming on the east side of the Sinai, and then you would have the new, well, for lack of a real name for it, call it the Eastern Mediterranean Canal coming up the west side of the Sinai Peninsula and terminating in, guess where? Gaza. Okay, so they're already getting ready to plug the Eastern Mediterranean oil reservoir, which is a gigantic oil reserve that they've known about since, well, between the First and Second World Wars. They've known about this since the 30s. Okay, they simply haven't accessed that gigantic oil reservoir. They've known about the petroleum basin all that while and have done nothing about it because it was offshore. And they were busily making use of all the gold reserves that are onshore, right? Well, so anyway, they're getting ready to tap the Eastern Mediterranean oil basin. And along with that, they're busily building all the infrastructure for a refinery system on the northern edge of Gaza. And you can see it. You can go on Google Earth and see where this giant construction project is taking place and where they're getting ready to put in the refineries and the pipeline systems from the offshore platforms to bring the oil onshore and refine it and then shunt it down to their new canal system, which will once again have a big change in the economy and the energy world as we know it. Because when they have this new canal on the eastern side of the Sinai, and you have the Suez Canal on the western side, you've got like a 2-lane highway going back and forth into the Mediterranean on either side of the Sinai Peninsula, right? And then that's connecting down into the Indian Ocean. So then they're going to be able to pick up oil and supply contracts for gas and refined oil products all the way down the east coast of Africa, the west coast of India and Pakistan, around India, out into Southeast Asia and all the other countries that can be accessed along the way. So they're opening up this huge new reservoir with all this ability to produce refined oil products pretty much on site and then ship them through this new 2-way canal system so that they can have ships going through the Suez in one direction and they can have ships going through the west through the new canal system on the other side. And they can also then ship all this oil and all this refined gas and oil product around the Mediterranean and into Europe. So that then again undercuts the importance. It doesn't end, but it undercuts the importance of the Russian Nord Stream pipelines into Europe and provides another energy resource to compete with the Russians in Europe. And so you see, this is all calculated. This is all something that's been in the planning and been on the books potentially for many years, but you're not supposed to know about it and worry your little head about it. They're going to go in and they're going to make these developments, whether, as a corporation, they're going to do these things. And the only thing that's really spitting in their eye is that Mother Nature, meantime, has her own idea of what a new canal system might look like. Because the Rift Valley in Africa is splitting open. And, that's going to, if it increases, and there's no sign of it not increasing, Africa is going to be split in 2 longitudinally so that you have 2 long, skinny, island-like pieces of Africa.
Yes, it's very interesting that that is taking place. But the issue that I have with all of this oil,
Because
it
we don't need it.
supports old technology.
Right,
We're still driving cars with gasoline, and this is over 100-year-old technology,
right,
130, 140 years old.
right.
Where is the free energy?
Well, and it also pollutes.
Exactly. And
So,
it takes enormous resources to convert it and, harvest it and, refine it and blah, 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 blah. And then, oh, well, gee, we have an oil spill and now it's polluted, you know, the
right.
um the water, the ocean.
Well, now we have more news coming out of China. The Chinese have just developed a technology that allows them to recycle lithium batteries so that they can recharge lithium batteries. And that gave new life to the electric car industry for sure.
Sure, but lithium is horribly toxic.
Well, yeah, all of this stuff is toxic and all of it's unnecessary.
Right.
But it's just being pursued because billionaires have sunk billions into investing in it, and they don't want to give up their stranglehold on the rest of us by allowing free energy. It's
Well,
just
if Trump wants investment, let's invest in free energy. How about that?
wouldn't that be a wonderful idea?
Yeah.
And let's just do away with electric anything and with lithium batteries in particular.
Oh my
And
gosh.
let's do away with oil as anything. I would be quite content to see oil go the way of whale oil.
Right? I
Um,
mean, it's ridiculous that this much investment is taking place at this time because we need to move on.
well, and if we're going to make these investments in order to buoy up employment and sop up the if the collapse of the public sector is to be buoyed up and tided over by an increase in private sector investment, okay, or even public sector investment in new infrastructure. Let's invest in infrastructure for the future. Let's invest in infrastructure that it actually makes sense at this point, instead of deliberately investing in things, as Terry says, that are, technologies that are over 100 years old. Now, in some applications, certainly, is the gasoline engine going to go away? No, because there are some applications for which it is perfect and it will continue to be used until something else comes along that's better. But this gradual change and it will be gradual just because of the economics of the whole thing. What happens to oil afterward? Well, I and numerous other people that have been involved in a think tank about oil for the past 30 years have suggested that why not use oil instead of using it for, say, generating electricity, which is a mammoth waste and it's a nonsensical use of it. Why not use it to make the equivalent of specialized plastic for building members, for making construction materials to build buildings. Okay, there are a lot of different things that you can use oil for that don't involve combustion and just burning it up into the atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, but we're just stuck with this whole oil thing. There's no new thinking, there's no new, innovation. You're doing the same thing over and over and over again because that's all you know how to do. And we've got to move on. I'm
Well,
tired of driving a car.
I never said that they were smart. Okay.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you've said over and over again, they're not very bright and not very original.
Well, and I think that people can't see what they're doing. The very first book I wrote was a book called Alaska's Gas. And in this little tome explored the whole question of why are we sitting here with 33 trillion cubic yards of natural gas on the North Slope and not doing anything with it? And why are we clunking along with this ancient, and I do mean ancient at this point, Trans-Alaska oil pipeline, which was never designed to pump heavy oil and which is 40 years, well, let's see, it's about 25 years past its expiration date. It was supposed to die off 25 years ago. Okay, but it's still here. Okay, why is it that this entire infrastructure hasn't been updated, you know?
Right.
One of the things that would make sense to access our gas and propane resources would be to put in a small diameter, high pressure oil pipeline to replace the Trans-Alaska pipeline, and then to scour down the Trans-Alaska pipeline and recondition it to ship a large volume at low pressure of the gas from the North Slope, and then have, you know, stations along the way to develop it into propane or whatever else. But anyway, it's this whole scenario, the way that our energy resources have been developed has been very slow, very lazy, and even stupid, where, you know, what they've been trying to do is balance the supplies with their contracts with Saudi Arabia, and they've been, and the other oil emirate nations. And what they've been doing is following a dictum that was set down in the very early 1900s by the Theodore Roosevelt administration, which basically established a natural resource policy that said, we're going to buy everybody else's natural resources at pennies on the dollar and make use of their natural resources and conserve our own. That's where the whole conservation movement thing got started. So that later, when the natural resources start petering out, we'll be able to charge, you know, fantastic amount of money for developing ours. And so this whole business of conservation was very cynical. It was set up that way on purpose as a strategic maneuver or policy, right? That was in 1908.
Right.
And here we are at 2025.
Right. But it just served a small group.
Right.
Yeah.
It guaranteed non-competition for a small group of investors is what it did.
Right.
And what we've got going on right now is another reshuffling for another small group of investors that includes Elon Musk and Larry Ellison, who I call the other Larry, replacing Larry Fink. And then we have Peter Thiel and some of these other characters. They're coming in as an investment group, and they just formed the United States of America in LLC, which is still an incorporated entity. So they've got a limited liability corporation calling itself the United States of America that's been booted up in London. So this is just more of the same old crap. It's just more of the same, exact same old crap, different day.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You know, a different group of investors. And, you know, you've got all this shuffling going around in the background. You've got all this rage and thunder over the Panama Canal. And it's true, Panama has made a bestial mess of it. It's true that Jimmy Carter was a complete and utter fool to give that away. It's true that Panama hasn't abided by the transfer agreements. It's true that they have been charging our ships, including the U.S. Navy, an exorbitant amount of money to be able to use the canal compared to other shipping transit costs of other nations. All of that's true. It's true that 38,000 Americans lost their lives building that godforsaken canal. It's true that we bore the cost of building that canal. And, you know, so President Trump has some valid grounds for griping. But put that against the other plan to put a canal through Nicaragua, and then you've got a two-way canal system that's better able to handle the amount of shipping that they're trying to push through the Panama Canal. All right, so now you have another canal, you have another option, and if President Trump has anything to say about it, you'll control both the North and the South Canal, call it Panama and Nicaraguan Canal, so that the whole thing would be controlled between the Atlantic and the Pacific, would be controlled by the same group of investors, basically.
Oh, wow, that sounds so familiar.
Monopoly!
Right? Isn't that what Rockefeller did?
Monopoly, Monopoly. It is the siren song of all these U.S. corporations, unfortunately, and they've all gotten into trouble for it, and they all deserve to have their fingers slapped silly.
Okay, but just charge them before they build it and save everybody all the trouble. Throw them in jail for monopoly before they even get it done.
Well, they're looking at the Panama Canal and the Nicaragua Canal in this sort of right-left transit scheme, very much as they're looking at the canal system on the east and the west side of the Sinai Peninsula. And all of this will generate a tremendous amount of work. I mean, there's going to be work for people in South America up the wazoo. There will be work in America with all of the different infrastructure and all of the new technologies and things coming on board. They're trying to boot up the private sector to make up for the loss of all the public sector jobs and spending that they're going to have to take out as a result of the United States Incorporated bankruptcy, you see. So, where they're taking out of one hand, they're putting in the other.
I'm not impressed.
Well, I'm not impressed with the way that they're going about it, because they're trying to keep all this stuff secret. They're trying to keep the lid on the fact that they're just administering a bankruptcy instead of being political heroes. They're trying to keep the lid on all these canal schemes. They're trying to keep the lid on all these new oil basins that they're going to exploit. They're trying to keep a lid on free energy when they should be developing and investing in free energy. They're trying to continue their old scheme of claiming a public ownership interest in private assets, including your labor, your body, your land, your gold and silver. The next big scandal that I expect to break is that there's no gold in Fort Knox.
We've known that for years, decades.
Yes, we've known that for decades, so it's not going to be any big surprise to those of us who've been paying attention.
Right.
It will be an outrageous wake-up call for those who haven't been paying attention. Now, there is gold in Fort Knox, or at least there was 3 months ago, but it was gold belonging to the Americans, not gold belonging to the U.S. And the source of that gold was that it was brought back from the Vatican, because it was the gold that was being used to bond American babies at birth.
Wow. That'll be interesting.
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to ask a couple of questions about the bankruptcy, but I also wanted to mention that Toyota is building a water car. Okay, so the bankruptcy that you are encouraging the Trump administration to talk openly about, honestly and openly, and just help everybody understand that this is just business, okay?
Right. Well, and we could do without all the drama. What do we need members of the Democratic caucus out in the street talking inflammatory nonsense about something nobody can change, and nobody's going to succeed in changing? I mean, Trump is following the orders of a bankruptcy court right now.
But when you say court, though, it's not really a court, it's a treaty bankruptcy, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's still administered by a bankruptcy court in the District of Columbia.
Oh, so there is a court oversight.
There's a court oversight.
Is there a court case number?
No, you won't find it as a public bankruptcy. You will find it as a private bankruptcy in the District of Columbia. Now, the thing that's going on here, though, is that because Trump is acting under the orders of a court anyway, none of these federal court orders, all these TROs and stuff that have been issued by all these quote unquote federal judges, none of that's going to go anywhere. Because, they can complain all they like until the cows come home, and all he has to do is shrug and saying, hey, I'm following this court order.
Right. I think it's bread and circus. I think it's theater.
Yes. Well, I think they're making some unfair advantage out of it. I think they're making some political hay off this that they shouldn't be doing. I think it's disingenuous at the very least, and immoral at the extreme, where, they're making it look like, Trump the savior. And really, he's just an executive officer of a corporation doing his duty to administer a bankruptcy.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for clearing that up, because you mentioned it a couple of times as a court, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that they only do the treaties, but now we know it's private.
Yeah, and they handle it as a court, however. If you look at it, there is no bankruptcy court in America. The only place that you find an actual bankruptcy court that's authorized is in the District of Columbia. And they've run that just like they've run the U.S. tax court. The U.S. tax court doesn't exist outside the District of Columbia. it acts like a circuit court, and it comes around and visits at the U.S. district courts, right? Piggybacking along with the district territorial government, right? And so they go around to these district courts and use offices and facilities of the district court to hold U.S. tax court venues in the states. But they don't actually exist in the states. See, it's a game of federal enclaves. So, for example, if you had an issue with the IRS and it went to the U.S. tax court, you, Terry Sam, your franchise is in trouble with the IRS, right? What they would do is they would summon you to a district court venue located in the state of Washington, right? And you would toddle on down there to the federal, what's called the federal court building, even though it's not really anymore. And you'd go in there and you would find a U.S. tax court judge using a district court courtroom, and they would be holding court there inside what is considered like an embassy of the District of Columbia government.
You know, I have looked at documentation, and it just looked so funny to me about that, you know, how they, like you say, they're pretending to be this thing in the enclave of the court. Yeah.
Actually, the way it's set up is that they have a 12-mile diameter radius around the court, which is considered the federal enclave. And so if you're more than 12 miles from the federal court, you're totally outside their jurisdiction. If you enter a roadway or a side street or something near the federal court building, you're in a coterminous jurisdiction where they have jurisdiction, but your state also has jurisdiction. It's a concurrent jurisdiction. And they can pick you up using their jurisdiction within that 12-mile radius. But you can contest that and say, no, well, I'm an American going about my business, and we have concurrent jurisdiction. All right, so, you can go through all this kind of stuff. Just for shits and grins, I actually went to a U.S. tax court proceeding here in Alaska, and it was an absolutely shameful event.
I'll bet it was.
It was really, really very interesting. They had 65 bar attorneys and three people that were being summoned and charged. I'm not joking.
That's ridiculous.
One of the people being charged was an elderly Black woman. She was probably in her 80s. She was having some severe mobility issues, not walking with a walker, but walking with a cane and leaning on her daughter's arm.
Oh.
And she had lost her home, a mobile home in Fairbanks, Alaska, to a house fire.
Mm.
And she had lost all of her records related to her income in the house fire. So it was close to the time when she had to file, or thought she had to file, her taxes. And she cobbled it together as best as she could, and she underestimated it by something like $200. And they had brought her into the U.S. tax court, basically to make an example of her and to railroad her in front of all these attorneys to demonstrate their ability to abuse their power. And they did a bang-em-up job of it. They fined her something like, I forget, it was like $3,500 for a $200 mistake that was made in good faith because she no longer had her records. Absolutely no mercy, no consideration of the circumstance, the house fire, the loss of the records, her prior 50, 60, 70 years of faithful reporting. None of that, just slam dunk. And then they gave her a suspended sentence of 10 days in jail. That was the only mercy allowed, that due to her advanced age and her physical condition, she didn't have to serve the jail time. Anyway, and then they attempted to deal with me, and of course I just So they got quite a show, and the 65 attorneys got quite an education that day. That didn't stop them from, convicting the federal person named after me, but what do I care? It's like, go ahead and convict your own franchise. I don't care. It's not coming out of my hide, at least no more than it would anyhow. So, you guys are just twisting your tails and spinning your wheels. And I just walked out on them, gave them the horse laugh and threw their paperwork into the four winds. But you should have seen the look on those 65 attorneys' faces. They went from being smug and smiling to being drained of all color. So it was more than worth it to do. And on my way out, I ran into this woman and her daughter who had exited the building ahead of me. And I thought, this is what we're fighting against. This is the kind of abuse of power, the pettiness, the meanness, the criminal nature of what we're fighting against here is explicit. I mean, there was no reason for any of the things that they were doing.
No.
Except graft.
And power,
Coercive power, yes.
That it just breaks my heart to hear a story like that, that they would abuse an elderly woman like that. And obviously she's standing there in honor, in ignorant honor, but she showed up and she's trying to make amends, and then there's just abusive, coercive power and collusion, conspiracy, and outright fraud.
Right.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be any question about the IRS. The IRS should go.
Mm-hmm.
Should not exist.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it from the federal employee side of it, a coercive payola scheme in which the payroll, it's a payroll tax. From the federal employee perspective, it's a obligatory but voluntary payroll tax imposed as a condition of employment. So that when you accept federal employment, you also accept the fact that your wages your salary is going to be docked, and you're going to be taxed on your earnings as a payment, a kickback to the parent corporation for the quote unquote privilege of being employed by them. Okay, so it's an illegal payroll kickback tax from the standpoint of the federal employees, and it should never have been allowed, ever. But then from our perspective, it's just downright illegal, period, at all anyway, because we don't owe and don't have any federal income. Now, what they've tried to do is use the use of federal reserve notes as their excuse. But as I just this afternoon sat down and wrote out for everyone so that you can all understand, they imposed this legal tender system on federal employees again, and then they misapplied it to the entire population. So they started out with what would be considered an illegal payroll kickback tax. And then they extrapolated this out and developed an entire scheme, and it is a scheme, to misapply that to non-federal people. Okay?
Just like Social Security.
Just like Social Security. Just like the Registration Act, the Shepard-Towner Act, only supposed to apply to federal employees and their dependents, right? Right. But it was, religiously misapplied to average Americans. Okay, so this is all just self-interested fraud, entrapment, racketeering, privateering, whatever you want to call it, it's crime.
Inland piracy.
Inland piracy. They've been trying to excuse their actions all along the way, but all of their excuses are vacuous. All of their excuses are self-interested, and all of their excuses are fraudulent. It's like one fraud built upon another fraud, built upon another fraud. So when the house of cards collapses, how great will the collapse be? Well, it's going to be pretty spectacular because they're going to lose their ill-gotten gains at the same time that they lose their money machine. The whole thing is going to go because once it's all connected, it's like a spider web. And so once you start pulling on it, the whole damn thing is going to collapse, and it has to. It doesn't have any other way of continuing to support its existence. Okay, so they've tried desperately through that pandemic fiasco to set up a new basis for claiming a public ownership interest in private assets. Only this time, they tried something even more insidious, and that was to foist off their genetically modified DNA as a vaccine. Okay, so it's an mRNA snippet, a snippet of mRNA, messenger RNA, that has been genetically engineered and patented. Okay, that little snippet is patented. And then it was foisted off onto billions of people by misrepresenting it as a vaccine. Well, it's not a vaccine, never was. It was an mRNA, quote unquote, gene therapy that was completely experimental and untried. And so all of their claims that it was efficient and safe, how many times do we hear those words, safe and efficient, safe and efficient? And it wasn't. They knew it wasn't. They knew they had no basis to make such a claim. They knew it wasn't a vaccine, and they advertised it as a vaccine nonetheless. What it was a snippet of patented mRNA that then produces DNA that gets included into your genome. It works its way into the cellular matrix and into the nucleus of the cell and gets incorporated into your actual natural DNA, your genome. And it causes all sorts of problems and does you no benefit at all, but it gives them the basis to make a commercial claim that you are now a GMO, a genetically modified organism. And they already took this to court in Biden versus Missouri and won the day. According to their Supreme Court, now realize that their Supreme Court is only two, okay? But according to their Supreme Court, all the people who received that injection are now transhumans, owed no human rights, owed no natural and unalienable rights, but are just things. They've been converted into genetically modified organisms that are owned by the patent holder, the principal patent holder being DARPA. Okay? So again, it's an obscene claim, and it's based on false representations. And they have gotten away with it so far by making these false representations in a vacuum. But of course, we already took action and outlawed it in this country. And we already outlawed it being misapplied to living people. And we are angry. We are deeply, deeply offended and angry that they would even try such an outrageous scheme to try to gain an ownership claim in living people.
It's so insane. It's literally insane.
Well, they got away with all this crap once. They figured, why couldn't they get away with it twice? If they got away with the first round by redefining us as humans, and they got away with the second round by redefining us as persons, why shouldn't they get away with the third round by redefining us again as transhumans? And just keep on making up all this vacuous, fictional garbage and getting away with it.
Yeah, and using the patent office as well.
We are calling for a complete investigation of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. We're calling for the dissolution of all patents issued and used for any criminal purpose. We are doing our job to bring these things forward. I just released an article this afternoon about the two exchange systems, a monetary exchange system and a debt credit exchange system, which is basically all that most people have ever known. Okay, but I explain this and I go through it. And at the end, we make our demands. And, these demands have to be carried forward and they have to hit the halls of Congress, and they have to, slap Donald J. Trump up the side of the head like a slab of frozen halibut. Because otherwise they think they're going to get away with, quote unquote, opening up the positive side of the what they call US ledger. Now, it's important for everybody to understand that there are 2 layers, well, call it 3 layers of the fraud that has been practiced against us. Over here, we have the municipal estate trust named after you, the straw man, the all capital letters name and all the derivatives of that name. Okay, this is the municipal persons over here. Straight on in the middle, you have a British seaman's estate, a British warrant officer in the British Merchant Marines who went missing years ago, and like Robinson Crusoe has been declared legally dead. His estate is sitting here in the middle. And over here, you have your original birthright estate as an American, which has been unlawfully converted by means of fraud and non-disclosure into an infant descendant estate administered by members of the Bar Association. So this is the whole setup. This is the whole spectrum. Now start over here. You're a baby born in one of the states, and you are mischaracterized as a U.S., a British territorial U.S. capital C citizen. Okay, what happens? Well, your original American estate is waived. Your mother unknowingly did that when she signed the hospital paperwork. So she waived your birthright estate as an American for you, right, without knowing it. So that creates an American infant descendant estate. Even though you didn't die, it's as if you did, because your estate was waived. All right? So there's the American infant descendant estate that becomes a public trust that is overseen by members of the British Bar Association. Okay, and at the same time that that estate is being waived, a new estate for you is being formed. And that estate is the estate of a British merchant mariner, a warrant officer who is known to be a taxpayer. And a taxpayer is a British merchant marine officer in charge of collecting taxes and tariffs for the British monarch. That's the actual definition of what a taxpayer is. Okay? Nobody ever told you that, and you would not know that, but that's what a taxpayer is a British merchant marine warrant officer in charge of collecting taxes for the king. Now, after 7 years, this person, this British territorial person who's been using your name, okay, which is a corporation, right, is missing. It's declared legally dead, all right? At the point that it's declared legally dead, an estate trust is formed in the name of that missing British territorial officer. Okay, so like Robinson Crusoe, he is missing, declared legally dead, and an estate is set up by the Admiralty Court under his name. All right? This is the second fraud. Okay, and then what happens? Oh, well, then the Pope gets into the act to collect his 60%. And he creates his operation, the Holy Roman Empire and their successors. They get busy and they create their own municipal franchise, a Sestake Trust named after you, the straw man. All right, so now you have this whole process outlined in your mind. The American, the British territorial, and the municipal persons, right? What's happened, folks, is that the municipal person just got dissolved, bankrupt, bye, gone, all right? It's in bankruptcy. It's in the final throes of bankruptcy. And right over here is the British Territorial Estate Trust that the municipal entity was formed from, right? standing in the role in the middle as the receiver. All right? So this entity goes bankrupt, and who's here to receive it? Ah, the British Territorial Estate Trust is here to receive it. Mr. Trump is right here, ready to, okay? So all of the estate assets that were in the municipal person is dumped into the British Territorial person, and that's where they want it to stay. They want to keep everything in this box.
But you have different ideas.
Yes, we have different ideas. We are saying, no, Mr. Secretary of the Treasury, Besant, no, that positive side of the US ledger that you're talking about, that is actually the American ledger. And here's the truth of the matter. Our assets are on your ledger because of your fraud against us. So that's the American positive ledger. And no, we don't consent to letting you administer it for us. You've already administered more than enough and more than we ever authorized you to do. So return our assets and return our original birthright estate. You know, you have two more things. You have to return the municipal estate, you have to return the British Territorial estate, and you have to return the infant decedent estate to us, the lawful, rightful, legal, moral owners. And be done with this charade. This is all unlawful conversion, it's all fraud, and it all should never have happened. So we want to blow it all the way back to ground zero, as if we had just come from the womb and hadn't even been named yet. And we want it all to just roll forward and come back home right here to America and Americans, not British territorial citizens.
Well, we have the potent evidence of the crime too.
Yes, we do. And we have the DTC and the DTTC on the ropes.
Right.
And we have Seed and Company on the ropes.
Right.
All of this, this entire structure is part of the old Catholic Unum Sanctum Trust structure, by which they laid claim to mind, body, and soul. Okay? And traded upon mind, body, and soul. All of this is extremely ancient crap. It's been going on forever. This is thousands of years old that this sect of this cult has been doing this. And it's called a death cult not only because of its weird rituals, but because it actually actively takes the living man and converts and represents the living man as a name, and from the name then derives these other persons and creates this entire system in fraud. It's all nothing but fraud. It's all fictional. There is really nothing that makes me Anna Maria Reisinger. Totally arbitrary. I could be called, I once famously said, I could be called Lady Flammolori del Cesa. It doesn't matter what, it's all fiction. It's all just labels. It's all just tags, right? Okay, so they begin the fictionalization process with a given name, which is not you. Your name is not you. Most people never stop to think about it. They just accept it from the time they're very little, that when somebody calls, Emily Paxton, well then, a little girl who thinks her name is Emily Paxton raises her hand, right? Okay, so they get you to accept this, that this is your name, right? And once they get you to accept the given name, right, then they foist off a legal name, which is the British territorial person. And then they get you to accept another legal name, and they're off to the races.
Well, that article was very interesting. And you also called for a moratorium on mortgages.
Well, there should be an immediate moratorium on mortgages, property taxes, income taxes, utility taxes, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
It should all be instant. The moment that this has been raised, the moment that the mechanism of this has been discerned
Mm-hmm.
and reported, then it is the duty of the quote unquote government and the police forces to investigate it and stop it. And if they don't stop the crime, then they're complicit in it.
Right.
And we've brought this forward how many times?
Oh
But
gosh.
now it's gathering steam because of all of the press that's coming out about the abuse and waste and fraud associated with the way these federal corporations have been functioning.
Yes, exactly. 100%. Um, that I just I hope that that something comes as a result of that, because that industry is just so rife with fraud and has been forever. And
Well, it's
it's
not your mortgage.
right. It never was.
No. And it's not your tax either. Did you see where Rick DeSantis is calling for an end to property taxes?
No, I didn't see that.
Yes, indeed. And so Governor DeSantis is calling for an end to property taxes. We all know that income tax, federal income tax, is bogus. Um, you know, the only person who can possibly owe a federal income tax is someone who has federal income, and that would be someone who was working for the federal government. But even then, from their perspective, it's also an illegal payroll tax. It's already been struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court. So, you know, they've just been using all these legalistic excuses, wiles and guiles, loopholes, you know, crap to try to foist this off on Americans. And to the extent that they've been successful, they've become complicit and guilty of crime.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, all right. Well, that was a great article. And the other thing that I wanted to mention too, when you were talking about the bankruptcies, is that you made an offer to the Trump administration and to Elon Musk that, well, it's one thing to cut, away, but it's another thing to recoup. And that's where all the assets are.
Well, yeah, but you see, they haven't given up on their idea that they're going to keep everything in the middle. They
No.
haven't given up on the idea that they're going to be able to foist this part of the fraud off on us. You know, the Pope read the writing on the wall, read the tea leaves, and said, "We're out of here. We're not going to stick around and see the end of this." Okay, so he just, you know, circled the wagons to protect the church's interests and exited stage left within for the church a very short period of time.
Yeah.
I mean, within 2 years, Francis had wrapped up the Roman pontificate. The office of the pontiff was done. And also within 2 years, the Romanus Pontificate's trust had been stolen by Jamie Dimon.
Yeah. That's what he does.
Oh, he's an absolutely rat.
Oh, he's a rat.
But what do you expect from someone who is working for J.P. Morgan? J.P. Morgan was the original rat,
Right?
right? Okay, so anyway, within 2 years they had cleaned up their act, you know, and gotten their little selves out of the meat masher, right? And then they had turned over the rest of it to an insolvency. By 2015, it had been subjected to a Chapter 7 involuntary bankruptcy. All right. Did I say 2007? No, 2015. I'm sorry. Anyway, so once Francis got into the seat, he very, very quickly moved to secure and defend the church's interest, which I guess as the CEO of the church he ought to do, right? And within 2 years had that all cleaned up, and then he subjected the rest of it to involuntary bankruptcy. And we're seeing now the end of that bankruptcy. We're seeing the process of the end of that bankruptcy. Now, Trump and Musk and the other billionaires that are making up this new consortium of billionaires to front the United States of America LLC in London. They are betting that we're so stupid that we will passively accept the money that they're going to gin out of this, and give the little dribs and drabs to the people that are actually the owners. They're going to set up these Treasury direct accounts to be able to pay you a few thousand a month when you're owed billions, right? So they're trying to pull off this secondary scam where the British territorial seaman's estate, which was established in admiralty jurisdiction, is going to be used as their means to collect everything coming off the municipal bankruptcy and keep it. They want to keep it. They don't want to even pretend to look at what happened over here originally. They want to keep this all to the side. And also they want to blame the Pope's boys when in fact they were all guilty. All right? The British territorial government was guilty, the British monarch was guilty, Westminster was guilty, and the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire. They were all guilty. There's no avoiding it. But Trump and Musk and the others are still trying to play this middle position and keep that territorial admiralty estate intact, collect everything, and then divvy it up as they see fit.
Oh, you've already jumped on that.
Oh yes, we've all jumped on it, and we can see what's happening, and we're giving them notice. Everybody's giving them notice. We're letting them know that we saw where you had the United States of America LLC set up. We know who you are. We know where you live. You're not getting away with this. No, we're blowing it all the way back to America, the real America. And in terms of doing all of the federal stuff, we can do that through any number of subcontractors, or we can do it ourselves. If they want the contract, well, then they better live by the contract and die by the contract and do it all in good faith. And I do not consider it in good faith to be receiving back all these assets and pretending that we're all British territorial subjects of the king.
Well, and there's the Declaration of Interdependence.
Right. Now that fell apart when they went bankrupt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once they went bankrupt, the Declaration of Interdependence went right out the window because they were no longer solvent and able to steer their own course.
Right.
So as of 2015, that interdependence has gone by the wayside. And you see the evidence of that all around you in that they're no longer working tooth and claw together.
Right.
The territorial government has lost their main colluding partner.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Now there is a question that a lot of people have, because I wanted to draw that big X over the municipal part of the one-page structure chart, and you're like, no, not quite, because everything's being resettled and sifted and that type of thing. But what about the contract, the Constitution of 1790? Well, how is that affected?
The Constitution of the United States still exists as a document, but with that involuntary bankruptcy, there would have to be a completely new successor created. A new version of the United States would have to be created by somebody somewhere who had a successor claim to the contract. So that would require the Pope to take action to spool up a new United States corporation of some sort somewhere and start out with virtually no assets and build it up again.
So do we cross out that line for the Constitution of 1790?
If I had my druthers about it, it would all go.
Mm-hmm.
If I had my druthers about it, this entire ancient arcane unum sanctum trust structure would give way to something very simple and very honest and very direct. And, people would know from the time that they're small that even though they've been given a name, that name is not them.
Yeah, just undoing the indoctrination is so huge, we've just been so lied to from the moment we take our first breath. And there's a lot to unlearn.
Yes, there is. And, it would be very handy and helpful if from the very day that we were born, we could be introduced to our name as a lawful person, and then could, open up our eyes and see all the other things going on around us. But
Bless you.
thank you. I, having studied all this stuff for all these years and having considered, pardon me, having considered all that I had to go through to learn all this stuff, it is not reasonable to expect any human being to learn all this stuff and be able to interact appropriately with all this stuff. I mean, it's a full-time job on top of your full-time job, on top of trying to have a life. I mean, it's totally above and beyond any rational comprehension that a person should have a family and an employment, a job that they do to earn a living for themselves and their family, and they should do all of this too. It's
beyond.
You're right. And so the system, I think, was never meant to be anything public. I don't think that this system was ever meant to be anything that anyone but a handful of high church members would know. And because those high church members didn't have families and were supported by the church, well, then they would have time to learn all of this and use it, right? But otherwise, just, Joe Average, the plumber, who's out there wrangling pipes and feeding a family, there is no way that he could ever find the extra time to learn all of this, even if it was open as a book in front of him, which of course it was not. We had to delve and dig and research, and groups of researchers had to collaborate. It's been an effort which has spanned decades and which has involved thousands of people researching different aspects to bring it together and know what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's just beyond. And when you read about it and when you think about what has actually occurred, you talk about the three different estates. It's just mind-boggling, and it's just beyond any normal man or woman's comprehension that someone could figure this out and put it into action and make such enormous amounts of money off of it for millennia.
Well, just leave a bunch of old, frustrated men with nothing to do but a sermon on Sunday and occasional last rites and baptisms, a free reign of their imagination to sit together for 700 years, and this is what you get. We now know.
It's just beyond. And it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful that your team has been able to put this together and put it forward and bring it to the highest court in the world, the Vatican Chancery Court, and have that now available worldwide to every man and woman on earth to know this fraud that has been perpetrated not only here in America, but just about every other country.
Wherever you've had a system like this, where you've had, say, a social security insurance or a enrollment or an enlistment or a registration, anywhere that those things have occurred, you've had this system in place.
And it seems to just be so ancient and so old, and it really makes you realize how much we don't know. We simply don't know. I mean, I'm a big fan of my lunch break, and it blows my mind every week. It's like all of these incredible, amazing buildings that are perfect. They don't need oil, they don't need gas, they don't need any of that. And they're just amazing works of art and fully functional. Um, and so there's just a lot we don't know.
I'm going to post one of his, or basically a takeoff on one of his, um, I think it was Michael Tellinger who did it, but I'll be posting that. I'll put it up for you. A wonderful shot in the eye kind of thing where it really exposes how much is right there in front of us that we don't see. And we're kept too busy working for the master, working for the man, to take time and really think, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. And it's the indoctrination too. You're trained not to see it. You are trained. They want to make sure that you just don't see it.
Well, we saw it.
And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's impossible. You can't take it away. I mean, I'm sure there have been times where you're just like, I wish, you know, carrying all this knowledge and knowing that I know this, now what? What do you do with it? Where do you put it?
Well, if anyone wants to know, they can always refer to Disclosure 101.
Yeah, my favorite book. Yes, indeed. I did also just want to mention that we had a big win here in Washington against the IRS, where a man who has been horribly harassed by the IRS for decades, um, received 20 releases of liens in the mail.
Well, about time.
Yeah, and we'll have the evidence of that at the coordinator call next Sunday. But anyways, so we are seeing things change, and I am talking a lot to the people in my assembly and also the coordinators, and I'll tell everybody here on the webinar, look at our landscape, look at how it has changed. I mean, the church is in shambles, absolute shambles. And the municipal is dissolved. And the Pope is no longer the Pope. He's the Patriarch of the West, whatever that means.
Right, right. And if you wanted to be in the Eastern Orthodox Church, why wouldn't you just go to the Eastern Orthodox Church?
Well, and the Department of Education is gone, and yep, bye-bye. So happy about that one.
Well, one of the good things that the Trump administration is doing is paying attention to what's constitutional and what isn't. And there isn't a word in any constitution granting them any authority over any issue of education or health.
Right. But the health thing, you got to watch Trump on that one.
We are. But, the constitutions are strictly limited contracts. They are very explicit and they're enumerated for a reason. The primary purpose of the constitutions is to establish the limits of the federal government. And anything that isn't explicitly granted is withheld. Read Amendment 10. Just in case that legal and lawful point was not apparent to everybody, they went back and they added Amendment 10 to make it explicit.
Yes, but unfortunately, the legal issue has become so out of control, where they just continually redefine, and then you've got attorneys that are taught to lie, and the attorneys become judges who also are taught to lie, and so you've got liars.
Liars and crooks in charge of your justice system.
Yeah, I mean, just us is what it is.
But you'll notice a lot of them are getting hauled up now. They're getting impeached. They're getting removed from positions in public trust. It's beginning to roll downhill. Today I got a query from one of the executive departments asking why they couldn't just arrest all the bar attorneys. Well, if you've got cause to arrest an individual for their own actions, by all means do so. If you find someone committing a crime, it's a crime. Hello? Don't wait for me, don't pass go, don't collect $200 If you caught an attorney engaged in a crime or a criminal misrepresentation leading to unjust enrichment, which is what was going on, arrest them, throw them in the clink. You know, that's entirely fair to do. They don't have any special protection anymore. Francis removed any protection or privateer's license for them, and Westminster cannot support a privateer's license. So there's nothing protecting them. Nothing. They may not know that yet, but there's nothing protecting them from the consequences of their own actions. So, you know, if you catch an attorney doing something sleazy or backhanded or misrepresenting himself or his services or betraying your trust as a client or customer, you want to be a customer, not a client. Client has a nasty connotation. Yeah, you have every right to throw them in jail.
Yeah, we need to send a lot of them to jail.
Well, and I think that is spreading rapidly through the bar associations and through the community of hired jurists. I think it's going like poop through a goose. That yeah, hey guys, we're getting pushback here. We're going to jail. We're getting impeached. You know, so that's going to have a halcyon effect on the judicial branch and on everyone associated with any kind of judiciary of any kind. They're going to have to, you know, get back to doing what they should be doing and not doing all the other stuff that they have been doing ever since the Civil War. Remember that these carpetbagger courts never went away.
Right.
And so the same abuses that the carpetbagger courts were famous for back in the day, they are still famous for. And they are still misapplying their jurisdiction to people through the impersonation scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I look forward to that landscape changing greatly. And
Well, honey, I'm looking forward to kicking butt from here to Kalamazoo. I am.
yeah, no kidding. And you're not pulling any punches either.
No, we don't. You know, there's no point in pussyfooting around about this stuff. A crime is a crime is a crime is a crime. A fraud is a fraud is a fraud. There's no point in trying to gild any lilies or be diplomatic about it. It just is what it is, and it's ours to call. It's ours to call it for what it is. And we don't, you know, we often describe the people that have been imposed upon, presumed upon, harmed, and abused as victims. And in a sense, yes, they are victims. I mean, all the people that received that that injection, which was grossly misrepresented, are the victims of false advertising, and you know, multiple different crimes were committed against them. And so they're victims. Yes, they are, because they were acting in good faith. They were acting under a set of false presumptions that had been deliberately introduced to them by a group operating under color of law. Those people who received those injections thought it was their government giving them this information. They thought that they could trust their government, of course, right? And they took it seriously because it was coming from the government. Well, what if they had known that it was just a commercial corporation in the business of providing government services and not their actual government at all? Would they have taken them with such trust and such, you know, faith in their veracity? Hardly. And so not only was the whole thing set up under color of law and conditions of non-disclosure and deceit, but then on top of it, it was grossly and explicitly misrepresented as a vaccine. It was grossly misrepresented and advertised as being safe and efficient as a vaccine. You know, all of these things were used to push people, to actually coerce people. The public shaming that went on against those who refused to be vaccinated, the termination of their position in the military because they refused to be vaccinated,
or employment.
loss of employment, all of these things, all of this extremely self-interested, extremely illegal, extremely venal, and extremely vile, because it was all part of a scheme to create GMOs and then claim an ownership interest in those GMOs, and to further denigrate the people that accepted the quote unquote vaccine as transhumans, owed no human rights, and owed no consideration at all. These kinds of actions by a commercial corporation merit its immediate and summary death, and the arrest of the CEOs and everybody who was associated with it, the board of directors, all of it. It should all come to a reckoning. Now, it's an extremely evil plan that they put into motion. It's an extremely evil intent that they had in doing this. It has resulted in the death of millions of innocent people. It is going to result in the deaths of millions more. The experimental results that Pfizer had and did not disclose showed that the vast majority of the test subjects were dead within 7 years. Now, in actual fact, Mother Nature has proven to be somewhat more resilient and to have a wider spectrum of responses than just the limited test subjects that Pfizer was dealing with. And so we may see that some individuals are immune, despite everything. We may see that some populations, especially those who smoke cigarettes and cigars, they may be dying of lung cancer, but guess what? They are somewhat immune from the spike protein that the mRNA snippet produces. So there are other factors that were not available to the test subjects, which may serve to significantly prolong the lifespan of some percentage of those who actually did receive the vaccine. However, your lifespan expectancy is reduced with each subsequent booster. So that if you first of all got the first vaccine and then didn't get any boosters, you have one lifespan prediction. If you got the first booster, you have another lifespan prediction. If you got the second, third, and so on, your lifespan decreases with the number of boosters that you received. And so the most innocent and trusting and someone said, and this was an evil thought, but we're dealing with pure evil anyway. That those who designed this designed it as an intelligence test, so that only those who didn't receive the vaccine would prove their intelligence and thus far their fitness to live.
That's horrible.
Well, these people are deluded by the survival of the fittest meme.
Right.
And they have been deluded by that ever since the 19th century, when you had these robber barons gunning around, cheating and stealing and coercing and plundering and hurting people, and letting workers live in horrible factory conditions and paying them a pittance for their time that they spent every day working. These are the kind of people that came up with this system. People like Cecil Rhodes, who was a complete scoundrel. People like Henry de Worms, otherwise known as Lord Purebright, who should have had his nuts snipped off at an early age. All of these vile 19th century robber barons created endowments and foundations and other things to carry on their evil ideas. And instead of actually getting rid of these institutions that are devoted to evil, we've endured them. And we've allowed our sons and daughters to accept things like Fulbright scholarships and Rhodes scholarships. And those institutions have in turn indoctrinated these brilliant young people into ideas which are evil. Eugenics is evil. And it's also, in the end, stupid, because nature has its way of making the decisions that men should never make. If men were left in charge, then all the women would be 8 feet tall, would have a completely different physical parameter. They'd all look like Barbie, and they'd all have gigantic boobs. All right? That's what men are. Men are stupid. Men should not be allowed to make decisions about how we look or how we function. Look at what men would look like. Well, I can guarantee you that they wouldn't look like Ken, but they would look like super soldiers. They would all be as distorted and as beefed up and as stupid in concept as the Barbie doll. Okay? Let's face it, there are certain things that men should not mess with. Okay? And genetics and genetic engineering at the scale and in the ways that they are tampering is one of them. They have created interspecies hybrids. Pigmen, literally. Dogmen, literally. They have dabbled about with reproducing dinosaurs. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been squandered trying to tap the DNA of dinosaur bones and recreate things like velociraptors. This is the ultimate of men playing God and deciding what's desirable or undesirable, and creating new forms of life. It's disgusting. It's hideous. And this is what eugenics as a meme produces. We talk about genes. Okay, so we have DNA, we have all this genetic material, we have all this incredible wealth of information encoded on our genetic genome. Okay, we've got all that. That's wonderful. Guess what? All it takes is one goofball named Anthony Fauci to mess it up. Okay, that should be enough to tell people that this should be permanently illegal. This should be permanently unlawful. Anybody dabbling in it should be dead. And that's for our own protection as a species.
100%, Anna, 100%. So why isn't he being arrested and prosecuted?
He is being prosecuted.
Where?
I just read it. It was an actual. I'll have to look for the actual article for you to give you the details. But yes, he is being prosecuted. But it's not just him.
Right.
And it's not just a group of wild-eyed eugenicists like Margaret Sanger. Okay,
Mhm.
it's these institutions. It's the
Right.
Wellcome Foundation. It's
Right.
the Pierbright Institute. It's
The
the
Pilgrim
Rose and Diamond.
Society.
It's the Pilgrim Society. It's all these elitist, nasty, Nazi. I say Nazi not because they're Nazis in the sense that people think, oh, the Germans were Nazis. The Nazis, fascists, come in all nationalities. They come in all sorts of varieties. It's their thinking. It's their pattern, where they're elitist. They think they're superior. They think that they should have the right to say what's desirable or not desirable, that they should have the ability to condemn someone because they have black skin and thick lips, that they should have some sort of, godlike power over the rest of us to make these judgments, and that they should interfere in the process of quote unquote natural selection to create unnatural selection according to their opinions. And this is why certain ideas are so evil and so damaging. And it's not that the idea even is that evil in itself, it's what men make of it. It's what people interpret into it.
Right.
So
and how they would be so willing to, it's like that old experiment, the shock experiment, when they, would you shock your own child,
Right, exactly. And so we have to become aware of our own mental defaults. We have to become trained against those defaults so that we do not commit crimes. And
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that experiment, it's like the millennium or the millennium. It's the name of a scientist who conducted a whole range of experiments. And we need to be educated, and we need to guard against these evil ideas. And elitism and eugenicism, these are evil ideas. They're just plain evil, and they have evil results. I mean, what kind of contempt would you have for your fellow man to do what Anthony Fauci has done?
I couldn't do it. It's not in me, and that's why it's so horrible that somebody would plan and, use their brain power every day to create something so horrible and so evil, and know that people were trying to prevent him from doing it, from creating bioweapons, but he still went around the system in order to do it. I mean, it was evil upon evil upon evil.
And he had to have contempt for his fellow man to do this.
Right.
Now, this is what elitism creates, is contempt for your fellow man. Contempt for anybody who's not of your mindset, who doesn't have the same IQ, who doesn't have the same color of skin, and all the rest of it. This is the madness of the Nazis. As numerous people have pointed out, if you wanted to win a war, why would you take a significant amount of money and manpower and actually put that into a concentration camp system and murdering millions of people? It cost money. It also wasted a resource. All those people could have been working. They could have been part of the German war production effort. They could have been making artillery shells instead of languishing in concentration camps, waiting for starvation or disease or freezing temperatures or whatever to finish them off, right? And instead, Hitler took all of this money and all this materiel and all this manpower and spent it on concentration camps. It doesn't make any sense, does it? The only thing that it bespeaks is a mentality of contempt for other people.
Yeah, and a desire to see excessive suffering.
Well, no, it's to destroy what you think is subhuman, what you define as not acceptable. And this is the elitism that the British system has preserved from ancient Rome.
Mm-hmm.
It's an evil idea that has its genesis in ancient Rome. And we have carried it forward. We've allowed it to come forward. And then when Charles Darwin published Origins of the Species, and was postulating, innocently enough, survival of the fittest and all this other stuff, this just gave them new rationales, new excuses for their elitism. And so it's festered like a disease of the mind and the heart in these different groups, the eugenists, the different endowments that were funded by these evil men, the Rhodes Endowment, the Purebright Institute, the Wellcome Foundation. So many of these things were devoted to evil ideas that were then spread to future generations.
Yeah, I think there is some kind of a disease component. I hate to kind of use that word because I'm not a big fan of psychology, but there's something there that poisons the mind and the heart somehow. And I think part of it is that they don't really have a connection to the creator, and they probably may not even have any self-love. And that in itself, I think, creates a very negative environment. It's often referred to as the pain body, where it becomes an entity, it becomes an energy unto itself. And so I think that there's something, very wrong.
Just think about it. In order to consider yourself elite, you would have to consider somebody else subhuman. Somebody else would have to be under you before you could sit there and think that you were elite, right? And you'd have to be pretty damned insecure and ugly in your heart and spirit to engage in such a mental game,
Exactly.
to develop that kind of contempt for other people.
Exactly.
So, you know, right there, this elitism that the British have fostered and fought for, and the caste system that Britain has suffered under since the days of the Roman rule, it really needs to be busted right in the chops. And it isn't being done by the Labour Party, which has been consistently a psychopath for the elitists. They've been bought off by the elitists. And so you have a Labour Party that's particularly useless and is functioning under the false expectation that they're there for the working people when they're not, just as our labor unions have been bought off and no longer represent anybody but themselves. And so, you know, the actual force that is bringing forward something notable and useful and good for the people of Britain is the Reform Party, which is falsely considered ultra-conservative. They're not ultra-conservative, they're just trying to get back to something that makes sense and which allows people to live and let live. And that is something that we're struggling so hard in this country to come back to. It's just a center of balance instead of insanity, you know?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
So anyway, I think we should definitely go after confiscating all the assets of the eugenists. I think we should take the, you know, the money in all of these, the Pure Bright Institute. I think that the Rhodes Endowment, the Wellcome Foundation, all that stuff that is associated with promoting all this garbage, it ought to just be gone. They should be put back in the public kitty for dispersal to all the victims of these men and their vile ideas.
Absolutely. You know, but dissolving those organizations, the foundations, dissolving them and, you know, ensuring, I don't know, I mean, how do you ensure that something like that never gets rebuilt again? Um,
It's a matter of well, number one, taking back the universities and colleges from
right,
these intellectual do nothing, know nothing idiots,
right,
you know, from these Marxist parents who don't even know what Marxism is about,
right.
you know, and going forward and actually teaching our children moral values and ethical considerations and teaching them to think,
Yes.
because so many of them cannot think. I mean, survival of the fittest in the wild among animals does not apply to people.
Oh,
Okay? And yet you've got people that are teaching who say that it does. Well, if it does, then you're dealing with people who are acting as animals, and they should be prohibited from acting as animals by a common core of decency and public law that moderates against such behavior.
right. Yeah. Well, all of that needs to come under the public law. I mean, certainly within America, but the Pure Bright, the Pilgrim Society, that's over in England and over overseas. And so they're going to have to rein in their environments over there to bring that level of sanity back that you were just talking about.
Well, you know, a dear friend of mine who was one of my mentors said to me, the pendulum swings and it reaches its as high ascendancy as the energy behind it will allow. And then it swings back down and goes the other way. And we have to be on guard against the ends of the pendulum swing. We need to keep that pendulum set and moderate so that there is not this kind of craziness that such has been unleashed in this country. Although I am sure that a lot of that craziness was artificially generated. It was paid for by men like George Soros,
Yes.
who are getting public money and abusing the public funding to create this kind of nonsense.
Yes.
You know?
Absolutely.
And so once again, it's abuse of money that is resulting in so much of this. And hopefully the things that are going on now with the audit of the United States Incorporated will allow people to see just how completely out of hand everything was. And it's not just Joe Biden. Do not mistake this as something that was a uniquely Democrat inspired problem. This was not just the Biden administration, although it hit the heights during the Biden administration. This is something that has been going on for decades. U.S. aid was founded in, I believe, 1961 or 62 by JFK. It's been around for a long time. Okay, we're talking 60 years, and it's been mismanaged every year that it's been in existence. Okay, so it's not just Joe Biden, and it's not just Democrat administrations. This has been an equal opportunity boondoggle, and we've had plenty of Republicans on the take. We've had plenty of both parties being completely irresponsible, reckless, and unaccountable, okay? And just as, the Congress was rebuffed for its use of agencies to write administrative code and enforce administrative code as if it were law, and the Congress has been told on numerous occasions, no, the legislative powers of the Congress are vested in the Congress, and you have to take accountability for that. You can't just hand it over to somebody and delegate that accountability to an agency. Okay?
West Virginia
Right.
versus EPA, yeah.
Yep. And 100 years before that, Norton versus Shelby County.
Yes.
Shelby County. They've been told this repeatedly, and they've been told it enough in the past couple of years, so they should be able to remember it. But there's another area of accountability that the Congress has to own, and that is that they can't just appropriate money and hand it off to an agency like USAID and never look after it.
Mm-hmm.
There again, it's Congress's fault that this has happened the way it has.
Mm-hmm. And Congress needs to be held accountable for the fact that they exempted all of their family and friends of friends from the
shop.
Yeah.
Everybody that voted to exempt themselves that was as far as I'm concerned, that is evidence of bad faith right there.
I think it's an admission of guilt.
Yes, it is. That's what I mean by bad faith. They definitely knew that it was something they didn't want. And therefore, they betrayed and were traitors to the American people when they authorized this scandemic.
Absolutely. 100%. So we are past our 2-hour mark, Anna, and
rant.
Well, we have so much to talk about because we missed last week, and we're just scratching the surface for kind of things that are going on this week. So there's still more to catch up on. But what I know you guys are still ramping up just in reaction to what's going on out there. So we've got all these teams who are really busy doing all this stuff, but now we're having to create new teams to focus on new things, to be a buffer and be responsive to what's going on in the landscape out there. So I know we need to get our begging posture up.
Yes, well, we were busy enough before, and we're even more busy now. That is the truth of the matter. And if at first you don't succeed in getting a Cash App to go through, try again. Sometimes the system here gets totally overloaded one way or another with communications. I sometimes get as many as 50,000 emails. It can be absolutely crazy. There are days when calls come in so quickly on top of another that you can't, you have to go back and look at the call log to even see who called you. So it's crazy here, and I admit that, but there isn't much we can do about it right now, except, keep our noses above the water as best as we can. We're consciously choosing those things that are the most important in terms of protecting the greatest number of people and protecting the claims for the people that we are responsible for protecting. And so we're making a very intense focus on continuing to promote our claims and continuing to force the issue of returning Americans to their birthright political status and returning our purloined assets and our purloined credit to us. Now, one of the things I should say is the debt that they owe us is insurmountable. They cannot possibly pay it all back. Okay, it's not even in the realm of reality to expect them to pay back what they've taken. However, we are going to press our claims within the realm of reality to realize a standard of living and a new system by which people will be able to live their lives in peace. And so we are gunning for a whole new take on money and on warfare and many other topics. Because we've had this experience, we know what we're dealing with now. And we're going to teach what we've learned to everyone so that it can't happen again. So our whole role here, besides bringing forward the claims and keeping the legal eagles occupied with their druthers, is to teach so that people are able to go forward and be assured that we do not keep making the same mistakes over and over and over, so that we don't get entrapped in these ancient systems of fraud and abuse, so that these death cults and these blackmail cults have no place to go and no advantage. There are things that we can do, and we need to discuss these things openly with our children and with our communities. We need to make wise decisions. And this is part of what the Federation can promote and do. So anyway, it's a heavy lot of work that has to be done. We have a relatively short time frame of maybe a year and a half to get it done. We are push and shoves coming to grips with the Trump administration and with the British territorial government and the British government at large on the issue of the British territorial seamen's estates and the return of those estates and the return of our American infant descendant estates to our control instead of their control. We're not keeping them from anything that is theirs, but they are not going to just sit by and smug and keep anything that belongs to us either. So this is the only lawful government that exists in this country. And next week, I hope we can cover all of their attempts to style themselves as a reborn republic. I want everyone to understand what the republic was. I want them to understand that it was an American republic, not a British territorial republic. I want everyone to understand why British territorial U.S. capital C citizens cannot create an American republic. And so we'll discuss some of that as we're coming up this coming week, probably at the coordinator training, and I'll hope to touch upon that next week too, because it's an issue. They keep trying to front these organizations like the old RUSA organization rebranded as the Republic. It doesn't work. I'm sorry. Irishmen cannot create Spanish institutions. All that an Irishman can do is create an Irish republic. They can't create a Spanish republic. And there have been enough substitutions over the years so that we have every right and reason to be concerned that they will try to pull that kind of a substitution and present their British territorial republic as if it were our old republic being restored, when in fact our republic was American. And the responsibilities and powers that were vested in that republic have returned to the Federation of States, from whence those powers and delegations of power came in the first place. We have no need for a new republic. We can get along just fine and take our time and decide what we want to do without having anybody foisting off their substitutes for our institutions.
Absolutely, Anna. Well, that is going to be a great discussion. It's always great to remember the original intent of the founding forefathers, and they were very wise. And so I look forward to that discussion about the American Republic and talking a little bit more about, what did it look like? What was its original purpose and intent, and um, all of those good things, so that we can kind of get a picture in our minds of what that really looks like, because it's coming up for the assemblies.
Well, I've been astonished, and I have been at pains to explain to the assemblies that their job is not what they think. Most of them think that their job is to replace the state of state, and that they're supposed to be doing all this work and micromanaging and having a legislative role and all the rest of it. No, the job of the state assembly is to dictate what they want. What are their priorities, and then to make sure that their employees, the state of state and the state of state legislature, perform according to those priorities and demands. That's, you're supposed to be operating as the bosses, as the employers. You're supposed to be handing over your roster of priorities to the state of state, and their state of state legislature is supposed to be guiding their employees in the accomplishment of those priorities. Okay?
Yeah, we need to put on the employer pants.
Yes, we need to put on the employer pants. And, it's the same thing for the Federation of States. The Federation has to put on its employer pants every day and tell the federal employees, the subcontractors, what we want. And if they don't do it, then it's their butt in the ringer.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, that sounds good. I look forward to that subject, and I sure wish you a peaceful week.
I hope so. I hope so. It's been a rough one, rough winter.
Yeah. Did the ice storms go away?
Well, we've had some bad ice problems here. Right now, I've got an ice dam on my roof that's causing some problems. Um, you know, it's just slicker than snot to walk out there on any of the side roads. Most of the main roads are now clear.
Good.
They've worn down, they've sublimated and are dry.
Good.
But yeah, it's been a very unusual winter here. We've practically got bare ground here, which is unheard of in February.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, and moderate temperatures. It was above freezing today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you'll get an early spring.
Well, what they're doing is they're manipulating the jet stream and forcing that jet stream down into the lower 48, where it's causing havoc with severe storms and severe rainfall. And they've been able to do that since the 1970s. That kind of weather warfare has been common for decades.
Mhm.
And yet they try to pretend that they don't do it when they do, because they want to avoid accountability for it. Well, anybody who has any doubt is invited to go look up the ENMOD Treaty, ENMOD, Environmental Modification Treaty. And that will tell you all you need to know. It will completely convince anybody that yes, geoengineering does exist, weather warfare does exist, and they are employing it here and now, and it is having all these bizarre effects.
Yeah, well, terrible effects, because as you have observed previously, they spray incendiary chemicals on our trees and on our land, and that is not conducive to maintaining healthy neighborhoods.
That is part of a different kind of weather modification or environmental modification. And the excuse for it was that they are preparing for a solar flash that would fry the earth. Well, there have been solar flashes in the past, and they haven't fried the earth. I guess we'll have to see what happens, but the bottom line is that they need to back off all of their misplaced, misbegotten, quote unquote, science, which is actually politicized scientism, and just get their noses out of things that they don't belong in. As I said, if we left it to them, all women would look like Barbie and all men would look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. on a good day, you know. So what we want is for them to get their meddling fingers out of nature, out of biological science. This has been just absolutely a travesty what's happened, and Bill Gates needs to be taken out.
Mm-hmm.
His money needs to be seized and given to the people he's harmed.
Yeah, and the Gates Foundation.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah, another one of those foundations and trusts and,
Right, but when they promote evil and when they promote evil ideas that, that cause harm, they're just as subject as any other corporation to dissolution. The way to defang Bill Gates is to take his money.
Mhm.
So take his money.
Yeah, exactly. And prevent him from raising any more money.
Well, right. Have you ever stopped and looked at him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's an evil man.
Oh, yeah.
He's totally screw loose.
Yeah. Yeah, he's horrible. Absolutely horrible. And he's insane too.
Well, that's what I mean. He's flipped. He's gone beyond the beyond.
Yep.
His contempt for other people has reached a zenith, and he needs to be shut down.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 100%. 110%.
The most effective way to shut people like that down is to take their money.
Mm-hmm.
And that applies to whether they're living or dead.
Mm-hmm.
It's, it's way past time for the Cecil Rhodes endowment to be absorbed. It's way past time for the Wellcome Foundation to be absorbed. All of those different endowments that these rich and evil people have left behind need to be taken away and put out of business.
For good.
Once and forever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Anna.
I'll try to get those postings to you yet tonight.
Oh, gosh. If you can, but whenever is just great.
Okay, my dear. Well, I think we've chewed the fat as much as we can for right now. Everybody on the East Coast is nodding off.
For sure. Take care, Anna. God bless.
You too, dear.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Okay, folks, there we have it. And thank you so much for joining us. And yes, East Coasters, we always do think of you. Sorry we ran a little long. I send my love and my gratitude to each and every one of you. Have a wonderful week. God bless and good night.